but I fight against it, even when my heart is beating so, so fast. But you just gotta fight. You gotta fight for what you believe in. And I believe in you.
What do you mean, fight against it?
I practice the same thing a lioness does to protect her young, never losing my focus or averting my gaze. Standing up tall, put your chin up, and keeping your breaths deep and calm.
You are a lioness.
Coming out. The narrative of Carter and Darcie unfolds as a tender yet emotionally fraught exploration of what queer women endure when the act of living truthfully becomes the very thing that destabilizes their world. And through a queer, emotionally grounded lens that centers women's lived experiences, the short film becomes far more than a simple portrait of a lesbian couple navigating a family's rejection. It becomes a story about internal courage, the fragile hope that accompanies visibility, and the unwavering emotional labor queer women give one another when the outside world refuses to catch up. Because Carter, despite being in a loving, long-term relationship with Darcie, moves through the film carrying an invisible weight that every closeted or newly out queer woman knows intimately. The dual ache of wanting to be seen and the fear of what happens once you are. And even though she has already taken that first monumental step by telling her family and friends she is gay, the emotional aftermath is what the film focuses on. The cold silences, the disapproving glances, the hesitations in loved ones' voices, the way people who once embraced her now treat her like a complication. And this is where the film resonates so strongly with LGBTQ+ audiences, because coming out is rarely a clean, triumphant, rainbow-colored moment. Instead, it is often a long, uneven process of shedding the layers of self-protection we've clung to for survival. And Carter's sorrow, her trembling doubt, her exhaustion, reflect the reality that visibility is both liberating and terrifying, a paradox that queer women know too well. Darcie, by contrast, enters the story as the embodiment of grounding strength. Not perfect, not invincible, but someone who has weathered her own storms and knows what it means to stand firm in who she is. And the emotional safety she offers Carter becomes the spine of the film. Because when society weighs down on queer women with shame, judgment, or dismissal, the greatest comfort often comes from another queer woman who has felt those same wounds, who can say, "I know how this hurts, but you're not alone." And this dynamic is reflected in the way Darcie speaks to Carter, not pushing her to be braver than she feels capable of being, but gently reminding her that bravery and fear can coexist, that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep loving yourself even when others refuse to. The film captures in quiet, intimate gestures, Darcie reaching for Carter's shaking hands, the softness in her eyes when Carter's voice breaks, the steady warmth she radiates even when Carter crumbles, the profound emotional intimacy that queer women cultivate in relationships where love itself feels like rebellion. And these gestures become a kind of language, one built not on touch but on presence, reassurance, and shared understanding. A language that queer audiences immediately recognize because it grows out of the specific challenges and joys of loving another woman in a world that still sometimes treats that love as less valid. Carter's pain at her family's rejection is not portrayed as melodramatic but as deeply human. And women, queer or not, will recognize in her character the universal yearning to be known and accepted by the people who raised you, the people whose approval shaped your sense of self long before you had the autonomy to define who you were. And the film drives home the reality that coming out is not only about stating your sexuality out loud, but also about confronting the heartbreaking truth that some people may choose not to grow alongside you. But Carter's struggle is also unique to queer women because the rejection she faces exists at the intersection of misogyny and homophobia. The long-standing societal discomfort with women who exist outside the roles assigned to them. Women who pursue their own desires instead of centering themselves around men's expectations. Women who choose a path that challenges the heteronormative narrative they were trained to uphold. And the film subtly underscores how much of society's judgment toward queer women is rooted not in their orientation alone, but in the fact that they refuse to perform womanhood the way others demand. Darcie's role, therefore, becomes not just that of a supportive partner, but also a symbol of queer resistance, showing Carter what it looks like to live without apologizing for who she loves. And even though Darcie is not immune to insecurity or frustration, she understands the terrain Carter is walking because she has paved her own path through similar terrain. And that shared history, the inherited courage of queer women generations before them, hums beneath every word of comfort she offers. The film challenges societal discomfort with women expressing love for women by refusing to sensationalize their intimacy. Instead, it focuses on the emotional layers that define queer relationships, the vulnerability, the fear of losing each other, the quiet strength found in shared glances, the sense of being understood in ways no heterosexual framework could ever fully capture. And, in doing so, it exposes how absurd it is that such tenderness, such compassion, such emotional depth is ever treated as taboo when it is, in fact, profoundly beautiful. The symbolic roles each woman plays deep in this reading. Carter represents the queer woman at the precipice of transformation, standing between the life she was conditioned to lead and the life she wants, while Darcie represents the queer woman who stands, firmly in her identity, yet remains empathetically tethered to the version of Carter who still hesitates. And together they illustrate the emotional arc many queer couples navigate. The tension between fear and freedom, the push and pull between wanting to be yourself and wanting to remain connected to a community that may no longer embrace you. Their dynamic reflects the real-world pressures queer women face, to minimize their queerness to avoid discomfort, to soften their truth so others won't judge, to hide affection in public spaces, to quiet their joy, to shrink themselves into versions that feel more acceptable. And the film brings this into sharp relief by showing how exhausting such self-erasure is, and why queer love becomes so transformative when it offers not constraint but expansion. For many lesbian and queer viewers, this story mirrors their own experiences. The trembling confession to a family member, the fear of losing friendships, the guilt that accompanies disappointing others even when simply trying to live authentically, and the deep gratitude for partners or queer companions who remind them that they deserve love that doesn't demand silence. One of the most emotionally resonant elements of the film is the way it portrays Darcie's encouragement not as forceful optimism but as a kind of emotional co-regulation familiar to queer couples. She steadies Carter not by dismissing her fear but by acknowledging it, validating it, and showing her through example that fear does not diminish identity, that doubt does not cancel truth, and that being brave does not mean feeling brave. It means pushing forward even while trembling inside. This is a message that speaks not only to queer audiences but also to women broadly, particularly those conditioned to be agreeable, deferential, or self-sacrificing, because Carter's struggle is ultimately about reclaiming her right to want, to choose, to name herself without apology, and Darcie's guidance becomes a catalyst for that reclamation. In the final emotional movement of the film, when Carter allows herself to lean into Darcie's reassurance rather than resist it, we see a woman beginning to inhabit her identity with something new. Not ease, not certainty, but possibility. The possibility that she may one day love herself as fiercely as Darcie loves her now. And that is the quiet triumph the film offers queer viewers. The promise that authenticity may not immediately bring acceptance, but it does bring clarity, integrity, and the chance to build a life rooted in truth rather than fear. Coming out ultimately becomes a story about love as refuge, love as revolution, love as the tool that softens the edges of terror so that a woman can begin to step into her own light. And by centering the emotional labor queer women perform for one another, the film reminds us that even in moments of rejection and heartbreak, queer love remains a profoundly healing force, one that refuses to shrink, refuses to apologize, and refuses to disappear.